Let's come to your book, where you actually speak about the concept of Hindutva constitutionalism, and you also speak about how the non-BJP parties' attempts to counter Hindutva with Hinduism is something that you call intellectual liberal laziness. You see, so recently in Parliament we saw Rahul Gandhi trying to take a bit of that Hinduism space, saying Hinduism doesn't belong to the BJP. Narendra Modi does not equal the BJP. When the BJP accused him of insulting the Hindu Samaj, he said, no, Mr. Modi is not equal the Hindu Samaj. So, and you write in your book about how other liberals, Pawan Verma, Shashi Tharoor, have tried to do the same thing. First, let's start about what you mean by Hindutva constitutionalism. What do you mean?
See, constitutionalism is a positive term. It is a normative term which makes a distinction between the right of citizens and the state. But there is another and much more specific political interpretation of constitutionalism. Every political party in India would look at the constitution from its own ideological vantage point. So the Congress would, the socialistic pattern of society was somehow Nehru's interpretation of the constitution. Look at the Communist Party's change in the system was also an interpretation of that kind. Now, RSS and BJP, and before BJP it was Jan Sangh, they were very uncomfortable with the constitution from its beginning. Their attitude changed in the 1990s, late 1990s, after when they constituted a commission to review the constitution. And after that, and I think in my book I said that I should give credit to Narendra Modi, the individual, because he emphasizes that constitution can be interpreted from Hindutva point of view as well. And this is what I called Hindutva constitutionalism. But there are three features of Hindutva constitutionalism which we must remember. One, that Hindutva constitution believes in a distinction between principles and laws or rules. The argument is that principles are settled. The constitutional principle of equality, etc., these things are settled. What we really need to treat, we should treat constitution as a rule book. And this is what we saw in different ways in which constitution is used as an instrument. For example, hijab case, or later on, there are a number of instances in CAA as well. Constitution was highlighted as some kind of a rule book. That's one feature. Second feature is there is a lot of emphasis on the idea of minority, not majority. The people who would say that BJP actually indulge in a politics of majoritarianism, my argument is no, they are not doing a politics of majoritarianism. Rather, they are actually doing a politics of Hindu victimhood. And for that, the idea of minority is very important. The entire CAA business was all about evoking the idea of minority to legitimize the victimhood of Hindus in a larger context, including South Asia. The third thing is one nation, one constitution. And this became very clear when the Article 370 was actually abrogated in 2019. So the point I'm trying to make with Hindutva constitutionalism is simply this, that, there is I would say, very interesting engagement with constitution, which was not there in the realm of RSS and BJP. It started in 2014 onwards, and they interpreted constitution very creatively to work out those mechanisms by which their strategies can be legitimized without deviating from the principle, without deviating from the constitution as a reference point.
The fact is, the constitution today is a protagonist in parliament. It was a protagonist in the election campaign. Modi bowed before the constitution. Rahul Gandhi carried it to parliament. You also speak about this Hindutva versus Hinduism dichotomy. And you speak about what you call, liberal intellectual laziness. You say that since 2014, the opposition to the BJP has actually failed to understand Hindutva. And that this is not a sufficient counter. If this is not a sufficient counter, Hilal, what is the counter? Because the opposition would argue that you can't defeat Hindutva with Nehruvian secularism. You have to speak the language of faith to engage with faith. So they fall back on this now somewhat trite we are also Hindus. You're saying that's not sufficient. Why do
Yeah,
you call this intellectually lazy?
it is intellectually lazy for two reasons. One, it is intellectually lazy because you are actually trying to respond to the strategic use of Hinduism by BJP, saying that we are more Hindu than you. That's one problem. Second is that you are intellect when we say intellectual laziness, it means that if I'm an intellectual, my task is not to look at what is said to me directly, rather to look at the framework from which an argument is coming. So the framework from which the argument is coming is problematic because there is no place for Muslim in that framework. Look at BJP's framework. BJP is highly uncomfortable with medieval Indian history. And that's the reason why I use the term laziness. So there are two possibilities. One, that I start saying that, okay, temple were destroyed, etc. Muslim, that was the time when Muslim were the rulers and they were, despotic, etc. And then I would say that the common Muslim did not have any relation with them. That's one kind of argument. But this argument, which eventually support the BJP claim that we were subjugated in medieval times, I would say that what BJP is presented to us as history is not history. It's a political interpretation of the past. And therefore, there is a need to do a systematic revision of the framework that is offered to us. In my framework, I would argue that we have to look at the present, the post-colonial India as our reference point and try to look at the idea of heritage afresh. And this idea of heritage should be separated from the kind of categories which we use in colonial India and then, during the time of partition were Hindu and Muslim. We are actually going back to those categories. Instead of using Hindu and Muslim as category, we can think of something else. I am not a politician, so I'm not in a position to propose new categories. My task is to look at what is given to us in the name of countering Hindutva, that is Hinduism. And this Hinduism, in my view, is highly problematic. This is not Gandhi's Hinduism, by the way. Many people would say that, many non-BJP parties, political leaders are actually doing Gandhian politics. This is not Gandhian politics, remember. Gandhian politics is significantly different from this politics in two ways. One, Gandhi was not interested in electoral politics. He was not He was not going to the people to ask vote for himself. On the other hand, he was saying that religion has got a social presence, and the religion which is practiced should not be the ritualistic religion. In my book, there is an argument that contemporary religiosity is, not philosophical, but it has been reduced to something called ritualism. So Gandhi was very critical of ritualism and and that's the reason why you have to make a distinction between ritual and the philosophy. Now, no public intellectual who is associated with any non-BJP party has tried to come out with a philosophical argument to make that claim.
So,
Even
so, so some
yeah,
some might argue that Rahul Gandhi, with a lot of missteps, has attempted that. So for example, Ajaz Ashraf in a recent column argued that Rahul Gandhi represents the Hindu left trying to take on the Hindu right. So there's certainly no disavowal of faith. But for example, he recently said that, we have defeated the Ram Mandir movement. In parliament, he showed Lord Shiva, but he also showed Guru Nanak. He also spoke about Islam. He also spoke about, Christianity. So there was a sort of multi-faith reference. And they would say that is what Gandhiji did also. Gandhiji never gave up the language of his own religion, but he created space for all religions, including Muslims, within that. How do you see Rahul Gandhi's attempt since you've said that this is not Mahatma Gandhi's politics, what is that fundamental difference?
the fundamental difference is that Gandhi was interested in social change. For Gandhi, there is something called an imagination of future, and that imagination has to be worked out in a collective way without giving up one's religious identity. But in this case, if the idea is reduced primarily to win election, then it will become problematic because you have to be very clear what the objective is. If the objective is to change this, so that's why I really appreciate the manner in which Rahul Gandhi actually conducted two Bharat Jodo Yatras. It was a great achievement because for the first time in last 10 years, he went to the people and talked to them. What is actually surprising that despite being among the people, he did not come out with a very positive understanding of Muslim. How should you accommodate the word called Muslim in it? Rahul Gandhi's speeches are fine. I don't have any problem with that. But he hesitant to make this word Muslim. He did not say anything about lynching of Muslim in the parliament. Now they are not 230. They are now 232 opposition MPs. Look at their strength in parliament. So obviously the lynching is happening, and you should have some kind of a principled position on Muslims. And until obviously Hinduism is fine. Hinduism of BJP is problematic, that's understandable. But what about the lynching of Muslims? And therefore, there is a need to have a principled position. Gandhi did not give up the idea of respecting Muslim in his prayer meetings. Even in 1947, there was a prayer meeting happening, and Gandhi started that prayer meeting with the recitation of Quran. And he said that I am completely sure that no one is going to object it because this is my fundamental faith in the idea of God. I think that kind of thing is needed. We have an idiom called a saintly idiom in politics.
I'll tell
That
you the
saintly idiom.
only that saintly idiom, the only institution where I've actually seen it practiced is within the Indian military. You actually have regiments where a Hindu commanding officer will lead the namaz prayers and vice versa. A Muslim will perform the arti, and I have seen this personally. That language of pluralistic faith. And that is another point you make, when you quote Rajiv Bhargav in your book, and you make the argument that this public manifestation of religion, this has always been the Indian idea of secularism. It was never anything else. Somewhere along the way, and I think the line you use is the opposition has been engaging with a politically disastrous form of secularism. This is what your book says. Can you give an example of the politically disastrous form of secularism?
Because if the secularism is reduced to making an assumption, like in 90s social justice politics, it was assumed that OBC, Dalit, Muslim, they would make a configuration, and that configuration will always remain secular. And the amalgamation of, say, SP, RJD, and other political parties will always be called secular. No, because they were guided by their political interest, and that's why the interest orientation of political class must be taken into consideration. But the kind of secularism Rajiv Bhargav argues, or the kind of secularism we observed in number of studies which we have done in CSDS, we find that people would like to live together in such a way that they do not want to become enemy of each other. And that people's secularism require, and that's, by the way, to answer the first question is this, that, in our survey, we find that the OBC, the success of BJP in last 3 election is significantly related to the move which lower OBC and upper OBC voter, they actually abandoned their own conventional parties and moved towards BJP. What does it mean? It means that the imagination we had in the 90s were wrong. We were wrong. Now, in this context, what is people's secularism? So because we did not pay attention to people's secularism, and we did not develop a language of politics in which that secularism can be accommodated, political parties like BJP took advantage of it, and they got advantage in a significant way. So therefore, I would argue strongly that there is a need to have some kind of a language in which people's secularism, living together separately attitude, can be accommodated.
Let's talk a little bit about political options and political representation. Now, you quote CSDS data, and this is obviously not about 2024, but earlier, to say that in constituencies where there are more than 40% Muslims, there is clear religious polarization. But where there are, let's say, 20% Muslims, the Muslim is more willing to engage with a whole array of options. So that's the first interesting point. But when you look at leaders like Asaduddin Owaisi, who have clearly, in a sense, positioned themselves as Muslim leaders speaking for the Muslim Samaj, right? Uh, you know, but in a very stereotypical way that further perpetuates some of the cultural stereotypes about Muslims. Then is this a very difficult question? Because on the one hand, you have the BJP, which has politics that are seen to be antagonistic to the Muslim. You have the non-BJP opposition that is defensive about including the Muslims. And then you have Asaduddin Owaisi, who is playing a very orthodox version of Muslim politics, right? So these are diminishing options politically, but has anything changed after this election, you think? This election result?
Even before that, even before this election, things changed. In fact, but if you go back to the book, you find that there are two ways in which you can understand politics. One is electoral politics, and electoral politics, unfortunately, is now reduced to number games. But there is another form of politics, which is social politics, the politics that is constituted at the social level. And we find that in last 10 years, the social politics somehow got strengthened. And that's the reason why, because that politics somehow in last 5-6 years had, strengthened, that the outcome of this election is inextricably linked to that politics. So I'll give you two examples of that politics. One is that look at CEA, anti-CEA protest. There are two ways to look at anti-CEA. One is that we reduce everything to that was Muslim-led. Obviously, it was Muslim-led. But look at the kind of argument made by common Muslims during anti-CEA protest. They had the copy of constitution in their hands. They were reading the preamble, and they were having Gandhi, Nehru, and Bhagat Singh and Ambedkar's images in virtually all dharnas that were organized by Muslim, particularly by Muslim women. What does it mean? It means that there was a strong assertion that we are part of this fabric, and the political heritage that is available to us must be evoked to protect our interests. So in that sense, it was a highly secular version of Muslim politics that was actually led by Muslim women and other deprived section of society.